Alright, what's cracking with y'all? It's your boy Prince the Hustle Guy, aka Wise the Warlock, and we reaching in that combat tool bag one more again. It is a cool black affair. Shout out to the mighty LDBC. LDBC or nothing, LDBC only, LDBC everywhere. So, one of the greatest fighters of all time, one of the pound for pound greatest fighters of all time, the second longest reigning undisputed reign in 100 years. And just one of the greatest fighters to ever exist. We're going to do a film study on the marvelous Marvin Hagler. So, Marvin Hagler, who has the likes of Thomas Hearns, Roberto Duran, Scipione, Tony Simpson, Mustafa Hamsho, on his resume, 5 Willie Monroe, Sr., Sugar Ray Leonard, the list goes on. His resume is colored. He fought Benny Briscoe, who not a lot of people know. He has a very heart-wrenching boxing story, but is a very, very skilled fighter and extremely underrated. He has, again, a beautiful, colorful resume, and to be one of the second longest undisputed champions in history says a lot, or in 100 years says a lot. And to be honest, when you study the great one, it shows. So, without further ado, let's get into the actual breakdown, his actual style. So when we think of Marvelous Marvin Hagler, we think of the fact that he's a power puncher, or we look at the southpaw stance, and we look at the aggression, the sheer aggression and pressure fighter side showed in the Thomas Hearns fight and the Sugar Ray Leonard fight, which did display excellent inside fighting and mid-range fighting, as well as the Roberto Duran fight. But we're gonna give a full picture of the whole spectrum of his style. So when we look at Marvelous Marvin Hagler, he was, I would say, one of the most fundamental boxers in the 80s. So when we look at the four kings at that time, you would think, you wouldn't think it's just the four kings at that time were Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Roberto Duran, and the man himself, the marvelous one. But they all had I would say, I wouldn't say traditional, but I would say the old school low lead hand open guard, which is pseudo Philly shell, which they all use principles of Philly shell, but I wouldn't necessarily call them all Philly shell because they had the low lead arm. I would just say old school low lead arm, pseudo Philly shell, pseudo formal. Marvelous Marvin Hagler, he didn't subscribe to that thought process. So Marvelous Marvin Hagler had, I wouldn't say a mid guard, but I would say he had a formal guard, though he stood in a southpaw stance. He had a formal guard, which is it looks similar to the peekaboo stance, but less squared, with your lead hand high, not low. The lowest we would see Marvin Hagler's lead hand would be his collarbone. And if you know anything about boxing, you know, if you know anything about science, you know the shortest distance from point A to point B is a straight line. And if you drop your hand just a little bit from your temple to your jaw, it'll give you protection to your body. So he was I won't get into that, but again, he had more of a formal high stance. Going into second, which is another thing that's extremely overlooked, is the fact that he was an exquisite defensive fighter. When we look at his defense, we don't necessarily see the flashy Sweet Pea, Sugar Ray Leonard, James Toney, the clips that we see of Robinson. We don't see the Ali style head movement, the swift rolls, the pulls, the slips. We see elements of that at times, but I would say stylistically, the way he used his defense, it would make him a pioneer of how a lot of, or even a creator of how a lot of the current fighters use the catch and shoot style. Boxing is a game of inches. Therefore, if you have, we'll reference it as the high guard in this video, but if you have a high guard or a formal guard with a punch coming at you, just turning your hand open to catch the punch, or parrying the punch down, or just simply blocking the guard by tightening or adding firmness to the formal guard or high guard that you do have to stop a shot from coming through. He was a master at it. He would time and come over the top with his southpaw jab, which immediately would disturb, and it works in orthodox as well, but we'll get to that later. But he would time and come over or under with a southpaw jab. He would come over or under with his left hand straight uppercut or overhand six. So defensively, again, he was, I would reference as a minimalist and but a perfectionist at the same time. So again, he would occasionally use slips and rolls, but his upper body, and that's all we've referenced so far defensively, his upper body is was very adept at the catch and shoot. Now his lower body, on the other hand, I'm glad I prefaced this with all of the attention on the aggression and pressure style, but when we actually look at Marvin Hagler's fights, he was a quintessential boxer with the feet, and cat-like movements with the feet, in and out, side to side, very, very consistent, and good unpredictable lateral movement. He would always get in and get out and get moving, and time to stop when to engage properly, which we would see as more of a slick or stick and move described style of boxing. But if you're an active counter puncher or a boxer puncher, a great way to draw someone in is not to come forward, because someone has to engage. And if you stick and move and pump that jab out there, i.e. as the great Marvin Hagler, he would draw the opponent into uncharacteristic like exchanges that would always seem to favor the great one. So before I even continue forward, I left out a stat why he's my favorite fighter and one of the pound for pound greatest fighters of all time is his record. Obviously, he had a record of 62-3. All 3 losses were controversial. He had 55 knockouts. I don't have my notes in front of me, but he had 55 knockouts of 62 wins, a total of 65 fights. So only 10 of his fights went the distance at the middleweight division in the 80s, which says a lot. But back into his style. So we've went over his defense and his stance. But if we think of his offense, Marvin Hagler, he was great at pop shotting, at intercepting, and at throwing combination blitzes. That's just quick, precise combinations, properly placed punches, and not being wasteful, not chaining too many punches together. Just a quick combination blitz, like a Mach 11, if you will. So when I look at his offense, obviously, besides the pop shotting, intercepting, and quick combination blitzes, he was great at counter, catch and shoot, and blitzing on the mid-range. But he was masterful, able to hurt you, finish you, and beat you at any range. He could beat you on the inside, he could beat you on the mid-range, and he could beat you at long range. Very economical with all of his shots. And to add insult to injury, literally, he had subhuman like power. When you see what he did to people in all of his knockouts, like, I won't even reference one, just look at all of his knockouts. They were all and I mean knockouts, don't confuse knockouts with TKOs, but when you look at his actual knockouts, they all really resembled the Thomas Hearns knockout. He was hurting people and breaking people, breaking men, warriors, so sickening to add on an elite level of technique when it comes to offense. So you have offense, you have defense, and you have some of his background, but his intangibles, when we look at the character of the man, when we look at his ambition, he was honest about everything he wanted, in as far as we could see as fans, about what he wanted to achieve, and he was extremely ambitious about what he wanted to achieve, and he went out and achieved it. As the most hated on, one of the most ducked, when he was, it took him, I think, 30 fights or 30 or 40 fights before he could get a title shot. And when he did get the title shot, they absolutely robbed him. And then when he did receive the title, and then the robbery, it was a draw. They couldn't even say, I'm not even going to remember his name right now, but they wouldn't even say he won. They just said he got a draw. But then when he received the title against Alan Minter, who said he would never lose the title against an African American or a black man or a Negro or an N-word, who he wound up losing and getting stopped. They wouldn't even let Marvin Hagler receive his belt in the ring due to the racial climate at the time, there were bottles thrown in the ring and everything that could be turned into a projectile fired at him at the moment he won. But again, all of these elements put together, these intangibles, plus the actual tangibles, the actual stats, the ability, it made a master martial artist and an unstoppable warrior and a hero of mine. So that's the film study for you guys. I tried to keep it concise, but I didn't want to miss anything. If there's anything you thought I missed, if there's anything that stood out, and if you remember the guy's name who's escaping me right now, who got the draw with Hagler, you could drop that in the comments. But please check out Acting Right TV, HFO the firm, 94 Films on YouTube, 94 Sun God on Instagram. Everything LDBC, everything. Simple Truth Network, Black Gents Grooming Company, and TrillTalk.net. Till next time, guys. It's Cold Black Affair. Deuces.